Hi, I'm sharing this information and I'm taking time to put it into spoken words on behalf of blind people or the partially sighted, and I do give special consideration to those people who I feel do not receive enough really of the information about what's going on in our world. And both my great-grandparents were blind, so I have a special consideration for people who suffer with sight problems. Now, yes, this is a long video, and I hope that people who are on lockdowns or self-isolation now take time to check this information out. I'm not going to read you every word of these documents, but I do feel that I'm going to give as much information as I can. And also I'm tying it in to the global events now of what's going on with this alleged pandemic. Now, I do not say that Covid-19 is not a serious threat and risk to health. According to the evidence I've received thus far, it does appear that Covid-19 was created in a USA or a Canadian lab. It is weaponised, and it is a new virus, and therefore, you know, humanity has less defence against a new virus than we have against the already existing ones. But how many of these new viruses have been arriving among the human populace over the years? And I'm looking at the hysteria, which is all I can describe it at the moment, of over 11,000 it was yesterday. It could have gone up today on the 25th of March. That there's been 11,000 deaths directly related to Covid-19 worldwide. Now, I do find that strange that there's all this fuss about 11,000 people dying worldwide of a new form of virus when we look at what was happening in Britain. And you know, this is from the BBC, and yes, it took them 8 months to report to British people that there'd been in excess 43,900 deaths on top of the regular 20,000 deaths per year related to flu and the related illnesses. And you know, we can see the graph here that in 1999 to 2001 we had very serious spikes where the amount of winter deaths were reaching almost 50,000, and then we see a very similar thing happening 2014 to 2015 after, you know, an almost 10-year, well, it was a 10-year downward trend with a slight peak in looks like 2008, 2010, or sorry, 29. You know, and I am wondering how the Britons, because this is just in one country, so I am wondering how Britain's health service managed to cope with 43,000 excess winter deaths on top of the regular 20 or plus thousand. I mean, it's over 20,000 every year. And I'm wondering, you know, now when we're looking at the amount of people who very sadly lost their lives to this new flu virus, and we compare that to the numbers that were dying in the weeks between 2014 and 2015 in 4 months, because these deaths occurred in 4 months. It says very clearly here, between December and March 2014 to 2015. 43,900 excess deaths on top of the usual. So how did Britain's health service manage to cope? Because if there were 43,900 excess deaths, then how many more were admitted into intensive care or treatment for flu who survived? And what was this flu? Why did flu suddenly kill so many people? Well, apparently the flu virus had failed. The flu jab had failed. The strain of flu had a greater impact. So, you know, there are questions to be asked. And also when people are talking about how many are infected with coronavirus, that does not really specifically refer to Covid-19. Because all flu and colds are coronavirus. So, you know, it's beholden on journalists especially to be very clear in their words, and politicians, about when they're talking about coronavirus, are they talking about flu in general, or are they talking specifically about Covid-19? Now, there are a lot of people, myself included, who are very suspicious about the kind of powers that our governments, especially Britain and America, are now giving themselves on the strength of this latest flu virus, and the threats of martial law and the inclusion now of all kind of legislation to give themselves even greater powers. And I'm asking myself why it is that Britain and America and many other countries are choosing a military and police approach to dealing with the virus. Why are our health services, be they privatised as they are in America or national as they are in Britain, are totally ill-prepared for dealing with a pandemic, of which we know could happen any time, but they have no masks. The government has no stockpile of masks. I'm told by this government of Britain at the moment that they have a stockpile of body bags in preparation for Brexit. Something that allegedly the British public have voted for, just like allegedly the British public have voted for this government by a landslide, which we do not believe, and we have direct evidence they rigged it, and they rigged the postal vote. But, you know, nobody's asking any questions about that. Nobody's asking questions about anything anymore, because we are all totally mesmerised and hypnotised by this new thing that means we can ignore everything else that's going on in the world and focus on Covid-19 and focus on survival, and, you know, watch the various posts on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook, showing people, oh, this is how bad it is. Look, I'm suffering from Covid-19. I'm in hospital. It is really bad. It is really bad. Flu-related deaths, it is a terrible illness. Respiratory problems, breathing problems are terrible. And flu does inflict those on people every year. So, you know, as I say, I am calling for balance, perspective. Put this situation in perspective. Okay? And then start asking ourselves, you know, what is the huge distraction going on here? And this is it. You see, because the scientists, architects and engineers have proven conclusively, and I'll leave you the links to their study, that what happened on 9/11 was not the result of plane impacts. Plane impacts did cause damage and deaths, yes, but they did not cause the Twin Towers and Building 7 to collapse in columns of dust in their own footprint. The fact is, according to the scientific evidence, these buildings were pre-wired with explosives. Now, this is a very serious development. because we've been told that, no, there were no pre-wired explosives. Everything happened through these planes hitting the towers and debris then falling onto Building 7. It was a terrorist attack by Al-Qaeda. That's the official story. And from there, the American government gives itself all kinds of draconian powers over the public. And so too in Britain and other European nations. How many people have lost their lives, either as soldiers or civilians, victims of the invasion into Iraq, Afghanistan, what's going on in Syria now, Lebanon, you name it. And from there, the rise of a far more empowered ISIS. And we get this, you know, all via this war on terror. But then, now we're looking at the evidence, we inevitably arrive at the question, well, where did this terror actually originate? Was it from abroad, or was it not from tyranny within the USA and within the highest echelons of the USA, to the extent that they could orchestrate the necessary powers to pre-wire buildings, the two trade centres and Building 7? What was going on? Why did this cover-up happen? The 9/11, the report, the commission. When juxtaposed against what's been discovered by the scientists, architects and engineers, it is a cover-up. They covered up, they ignored evidence, and they covered up. They gave the American people an official account that we now understand was a pack of lies. And now, most alarmingly, directly on all the changes that came about, the Patriot Act, they are now using those and even giving themselves more powers to deal with an alleged flu pandemic. Which, as I say, worldwide, when we consider from February to March, January to March, worldwide has killed less than 11,000 people. Sorry, has killed 11,000 people. Less, far, far less than the 43,000 excess winter deaths in Britain, that's one nation, during 2014 to 2015 in the same amount of time. And we know for a fact, according to the evidence, that this Covid-19 has been around at least since August 2019 in America and in Britain. And I have heard from people who work as doctors and nurses who said they are very sure that this has been around a lot longer than when it was first announced by the British government or even China, that this strange flu was hitting people. One of my friends was in hospital with pneumonia, asthmatic, flu, after getting flu during November. So we all need to be awake and alert to what is going on, because there is an agenda. It's an evil agenda. It's being created by evil people, and they are evil because they live above the law. They believe that they have rights to violate international law. You know, this is the Israeli government, who perhaps are the most honest among all the governments of the cabal that joined in the 9/11 lie, which is Israel, because here they are honestly explaining that they are entitled to violate the law of sovereign foreign countries, and they're allowed to ignore the directives of international law in any field they wish. Now, America and Britain are doing the same, as are other European nations. It's just that they haven't come right out and said it. But here we have the words from the horse's mouth, which cannot be ignored. We cannot ignore this in light of the evidence that has come about. And when we understand that the Britain's government and America's government and many governments in Europe are directly aligned with Israel, and I'm not criticising Israel itself as a nation or the Israeli people, just as I don't criticise the American people or the British people or the European people, who themselves are victims of these far-right, extremist, evil, criminal governments now controlling us by hook or by crook. But all of them support this. So now this is a direct threat to the world order, isn't it? The information, the facts of 9/11. So we're talking, this is a global issue, because every country was impacted by it. Every country has lost soldiers to fighting the resulting war of terror. Every country has blood on its hands when we look at the impacts on the nations that they've invaded on the strength of this war on terror. That's all goes back to 9/11. So this is a global issue. So how do you distract the whole world from a global issue, except by orchestrating a global pandemic? Except there's always a silver lining in every one of the clouds that they puff out to block out the sun. Because this is the sun, the scientists and architects and engineers' findings. And the silver lining is, well, they put everybody on a lockdown. So now you have time. You have time, people, to examine the evidence, to think about it. Think about the implications now. Think about the enormity of what is going on here that has been ignored again by the mainstream media. And we're talking about American citizens' lives here. And how many lives have been lost now as a result of the lies that were told on 9/11. So I'm going to leave you all these links, and I ask you please, bear in mind now the importance of this as we're dealing with this pandemic. So we've got this historic battle brewing in New York City over Lawyers Committee grand jury petition. Today in New York, a legal battle for the integrity of the grand jury process and the First Amendment right to petition for redress is being waged. On Friday night, March 20th, 2020, Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry Litigation Director Mick Harrison and his co-counsel Lawyers Committee Board Director John O'Kelly filed an historic 4-count First Amended complaint in the Southern District of New York against the United States Attorney for the Southern District, Jeffrey Berman, the Department of Justice, and the United States Attorney General William Barr, demanding relief from the federal courts concerning the petition from the Lawyers Committee to the United States Attorney to present to a grand jury evidence of federal crimes involving the use of explosives and incendiaries at the World Trade Center on 9/11. To date, 19 years after the fact, no grand jury criminal investigation concerning the destruction of the World Trade Center towers on 9/11 has been convened. And it says see First Amended Complaint, and this is the First Amended Complaint. And I will leave you the link to this, and I strongly advise you, please read through it. The Lawyers Committee requests that the United States Attorney General Geoffrey Berman be judicially compelled either to provide some indication that he is acting in good faith and presenting the evidence previously given to him by the Lawyers Committee in 2018 to the grand jury, or, if he is not presenting the evidence, for an order from the judge instructing him to perform his mandatory duty to present to a grand jury the evidence of explosives and incendiaries involved in the destruction of the World Trade Center towers previously given to him in the Lawyers Committee permission. United States Attorney Berman had written to the Lawyers Committee on November 7, 2018, stating that he had read and reviewed the submissions given to him by the Lawyers Committee, that he would comply with the law 18 U.S.C. 3332 regarding the submissions. The Lawyers Committee has no way of knowing whether he is complying and therefore is requesting that the federal judge order the United States Attorney to comply with the law. In addition to the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 inquiry, co-plaintiffs included are architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth and Richard Gage, Jean Evans, who lost her brother, Nassau County, Franklin Square, Munson Fire Commissioner Christopher Gioia, Diana Hetzel, who lost her husband, Bob McIlvaine, who lost his son, and the NYC Fire Chief Michael J. O'Kelly. See the declarations. The defendants previously claimed through court filings that the Plaintiffs' Administrative Procedure Act and Federal Mandamus Statute suit to compel a grand jury presentation should be dismissed for lack of standing. Lack of standing? We're talking about scientific evidence. I will leave you. You know, they've spent years on this, and this cannot be ignored. The Lawyers Committee exercised their right to amend the complaint to add additional plaintiffs, and also added an additional count based on a constitutional argument related to the First Amendment, people's right to petition the government for redress of grievances. The United States Attorney has 14 days to respond to the first amended complaint. Please support the Lawyers Committee in our effort through grand juries to attain government transparency and accountability for the claims of 9/11. Thank you, David R. Mice-Winkle, President, Executive Director, Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. This is a bombshell of news, and if the world's media, including a lot of the alternative media, were giving this the same amount of attention as is being given to a virus which, as I say, globally today has killed less, well, barely a quarter of the amount of people. I think it might just be a quarter of the amount of people dying in Britain of flu and flu deaths. The related illnesses in Britain during 2014 to 2015 and in the years 1999, 2000 and 2001. And as I say, I'm not negating this. You know, personally, as far as I'm concerned, they're saying, well, this particular strain of flu has a higher death rate, when actually that statement cannot be made because not everybody is being tested. We have no idea how many among the populace have the virus or have even had it with only mild symptoms, in order to say definitively that this particular strain of flu kills more people than any other strains of flu in the past. We have no actual evidence to support that it's got a 4% or 2% death rate. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that it doesn't, but what I'm saying is we need to stick to evidence before we allow ourselves to be whipped up into a frenzy by official narratives on anything. And especially not when we look at the level of lies that were told in relation to 9/11 and the levels of powers that they gave themselves on the strength of those lies and the xenophobia they perpetuated throughout the world, and particularly against Muslims, who have, as a result, suffered in every community, in every nation throughout the world now, directly because of what happened on 9/11 and the lies that were told, that people were persuaded to believe by a media that have themselves let us all down, an allegedly free media there to hold authorities to account, to present the news and evidence to the public, repeatedly ignored and judged everybody asking questions a conspiracy theorist who needs to wear a tinfoil hat. Well, when you look at the actual evidence as presented now by the scientists and engineers and architects, who was wearing the tinfoil hats? Who presented the whole world with a conspiracy theory? And, you know, reading through this is distressing. When you read the plaintiffs now that have come forward, you know, to be part of this, obviously they haven't included every single person that lost their lives, because it would, you know, but there's a token group of families who've lost members. And, you know, to this very day, these people, the families, the relatives, the friends, the whole world actually, and America in particular, is suffering directly as a result of these lies and this attack. An orchestrated attack. And I'll leave you James Corbett's 9/11 Follow the Money, which explains how there was obvious inside information going on, insider trading, and we witnessed the exact same with this coronavirus, in which actual government ministers now in the USA, people directly in the know, were selling stocks prior to the release of the news about this outbreak of a new virus. And it is, as I say, please take time to read it. And especially if you know somebody who is partially sighted, read it to them. I mean, I will try. My voice just isn't very good at the moment. I live with complex PTSD, and as a result of that, I suffer from autoimmune illnesses, and with all the stress of everything that's been going on this last year especially, and that I have been addressing and dealing with directly, to the extent, you know, I've written this and numerous other articles directly confronting the powers that be. My stress levels have caused my autoimmune to worsen, and it does affect my respiratory system and, you know, fibromyalgia and all kinds of other associated illnesses that are directly related to stress. And obviously, as I'm already living with PTSD, which is an ongoing form of stress, you know, my voice just isn't up to reading this whole thing out right now. But I hope if anybody can do that, please do it. But I am sharing the information, and hopefully anybody who's listening to this who is blind or partially sighted will be able to ask a friend or a family member to take the time to read this out for them. But it is absolutely disturbing. It is disturbing as what is explained in this document now, the legal court document, of how, William Barr, for example, has abused his powers in denying the people their right to issue this complaint now and to present the evidence to a grand jury. And, as it says here, in the July 30th, 2018, amended petition delivered to the Office of the United States Attorney, as in the original petition, the Lawyers Committee presented extensive scientific and eyewitness evidence that explosives were used to destroy 3 World Trade Center buildings on 9/11. That evidence included the following: a report in a peer-reviewed scientific journal of independent scientific laboratory analysis of World Trade Center dust samples showing the presence of high-tech explosives and or incendiaries in the form of nanothermite or nanothermate. Testimony of numerous New York firefighters who were 9/11 first responders that they heard sounds of explosions and saw explosions on 9/11 at the World Trade Center resembling controlled demolitions. Some reported seeing molten iron like in a foundry, which would not be possible as a result of fires fueled by the building contents and jet fuel alone. Testimony and scientific analysis by numerous architects, engineers, physicists and chemists which demonstrates conclusively that the World Trade Center Twin Towers and World Trade Center Building 7 were brought down by use of explosive incendiaries, not by airplane impacts or the resulting jet fuel and building fires. This expert analysis and opinion includes technical analysis of video evidence of the World Trade Center building collapses, demonstrating that World Trade Center 1 and World Trade Center 2 fell at near free fall acceleration, while World Trade Center 7 exhibit actual free fall acceleration for approximately 1/3 of the total collapse time, which would not be physically possible absent use of explosives and or incendiaries. Expert analysis of seismic evidence resulting in an expert opinion that explosions occurred at the Twin Towers on 9/11 prior to the plane impacts and prior to the building collapses, which expert analysis was supported by the testimony of World Trade Center janitor William Rodriguez and other eyewitnesses who reported what they heard, saw and felt evidence of explosions in the basement and lobby of World Trade Center 1 and World Trade Center 2 prior to the World Trade Center plane impacts. Scientific reports and testimony documenting the presence of molten iron at ground zero, which proves that temperatures were much higher than those that jet fuel fires and building contents could create. The extreme temperatures documented are consistent with use of high-tech explosive and or incendiary materials such as nanothermite or nanothermate. Scientific reports and testimony documenting the presence of the World Trade Center dust of previously molten iron microspheres in large quantities, as confirmed by electron microscope analysis of World Trade Center dust samples by both government and independent scientists. It is impossible for jet fuel fires and office contents fires to create such microspheres, but such microspheres would be expected from the use of nanothermite or nanothermate. Video evidence that shows the ejection during the collapse of World Trade Center 1 and 2 of heavy steel structural elements laterally some distance from these World Trade Center buildings, which would not be possible from a gravity-driven collapse. Scientific analysis, testimony and government reports confirming sulfidation and high-temperature corrosion of the steel found in the rubble after the collapse of the World Trade Center Towers and World Trade Center 7, a phenomenon not expected in a jet fuel fire and gravity-driven collapse, but consistent with the use of nanothermate. In the petition and amended petition, the Lawyers Committee concludes that the scientific video and eyewitness evidence taken together is conclusive that explosive and or incendiary devices that had been pre-planted at the World Trade Center were detonated, causing the complete collapse of the World Trade Center Twin Towers on 9/11, substantially increasing the tragic loss of life from the 9/11 terrorist attacks. The Lawyers' Committee states unequivocally that the evidence permits no other conclusion as a matter of science, as a matter of logic, and as a matter of law. Notwithstanding the Lawyers' Committee's conclusions in this regard, conclusions supported by numerous scientists, architects and engineers, the Lawyers' Committee in the petition and amended petition do not ask the United States Attorney or a special grand jury adopt these or any other conclusions. The Lawyers' Committee simply asked the United States Attorney to honour its non-discretionary duty pursuant to 18 U.S.C. 3332A to submit this evidence to a special grand jury and allow the special grand jurors to draw whatever conclusions of their own they find justified after investigating the matter using the substantial investigative powers and tools the laws provides to a special grand jury. So that's the basic gist of it. And this does lead to very, very serious questions and conclusions. The fact is, those buildings were pre-wired. There had to be inside knowledge. There had to be inside information. This had to be a pre-orchestrated act of tyranny in order to justify invading foreign nations, ignoring international law, ignoring the sovereign rights of people and laws of other nations. And it is very, very disturbing now that on the back of this pandemic, America has now offered use of NATO to Europe specifically to deal with the pandemic, when they've already got almost 40,000 troops coming into Europe, 10,000 already here, and now another almost 30,000 coming into Europe, originally on the pretext of testing Europe's bridges and roads as to whether or not they can cope with heavy military equipment. Apparently they decided to go ahead with this test of our bridges and roads right in the middle of a pandemic. And then as soon as they positioned them all, next minute President Trump's talking about NATO helping Europe to deal with the pandemic. Is it so difficult to mass produce masks, gloves, tests, to quarantine the people who show signs and symptoms until the signs and symptoms have gone? That would be the reasonable way to deal with it. But no, instead it's going to be martial law and then mass vaccinations, apparently. Why are the people of the world putting up with this? Why is the independent media not picking up on the evidence and this case? Do we really believe that this has got nothing to do at all with what's going on now and the powers they're giving themselves, as I say, directly on the strength of the powers they gave themselves on the lie of 9/11? And now they're giving themselves even more powers on what looks like could be another lie in terms of the virility of this particular virus. Please share this information. As I say, if you're on a lockdown in self-isolation now, you've got some time to read. Read the information, read the facts. You know, I'll even leave you my link. You can read that. Make use. Because, you know, time is one thing that this New World Order criminal cabal really does not have. We are the ones with the time, okay? Because the evidence has caught up with them already. And how long can this corporate alleged media last now in face of the facts and evidence? It is up to us. It is up to us. You know, I get on my Twitter at the moment and all I see is people moaning, oh look, these people, they're all shopping together, look, groups of workers travelling to work on a train. Oh look, they're not obeying the 3 feet order. You know, we're going to have stronger action. It's like, please, give us martial law. It's like, go away. Why aren't you asking, where's the masks? Where's the gloves? Where's the adequate income so people don't have to go to work so they can self-isolate? Where's the tests? But no, as usual, people being indoctrinated now to point fingers at each other. Basically, like they did in Nazi Germany. Oh, dissident, dissident. Snitches. You know, I don't regard somebody who reports real crimes, people who are a real danger to the police, as a snitch. But it is a snitch mentality when people are putting photographs on Twitter of a train crammed full of people going to work to keep this nation going, to post their mail, get their food delivered. And they're using them then, pointing fingers at them to demand martial law. I find that very disturbing. Why aren't people asking questions about this? Why aren't people asking more questions about the lack of masks and gloves and testing? So anyway, thank you for taking time to listen. I wish everybody well. Finally, I will share this again. If you have concerns about this virus, if you have an impaired immunity like myself, like I do, and the person I care for, please cut out sugar from your diet. It's one of the biggest things that you can do, the most effective things to protect yourself and to enhance your body's natural defences, because sugar does have the potential to reduce your body's defences by 75% or more for 4 to 6 hours. So I would suggest cutting it out, or if you are going to eat sugar, then do remember that for 4 to 6 hours your immunity will be impaired. Okay, so take that into account before you go out after having sugar. So thank you very, very much for taking time to listen, and God bless to everybody.